I'm John Enright. I'm an architect with Griffin Enright Architects. My partner, Margaret Griffin, and I both live here. This is our own house.
My name is Margaret Griffin, and we are at my house that I share with my husband, John Enright, and that's in Santa Monica. The house sits in a hillside. It climbs up a hill. So from the front of our property to the rear of our property, we have 30 feet in elevation gain. We're standing on the terrace of the guest house, and we have a view over the main house, and you can see the ocean.
This is actually an addition to an existing house, although we've added so much to it that there's not much left of the existing house. The existing house was built in 1955, and we purchased it from actually the estate of the original owner in 2002. So we've been here, I guess, about 17 years. And we just renovated it the last 2 or 3 years.
We probably had 15 designs for the house over the past 15 years. We were sort of refining the designs and making each one more and more efficient. The house is extremely discreet. It's only 1,800 square feet. Strategically, we also phased the project. So we built the guest house first. When we built this guest house first, we needed some augmented entertainment space at that time. So we made this guest house have a big terrace. And the terrace has a whole variety of ways to gather. In the corner, there's a fire pit and a built-in concrete bench that you can see the view of the ocean from. And behind me is the dining table area that is set down into the deck, so that when you're sitting in the guest house, you look over the dining table and it's not in your way. But also when you sit down in that dining area, you kind of feel like nestled into the garden. The guest house functions both as a separate room for us, but also it's a multi-function room. And then we moved out and built the renovation after. Putting the garden back in was the last piece.
The material palette's really simple. First, it's kind of related to color, so it's a black and white house in a lot of ways. So the walls are simply white. The basalt floors are a dark black. We like that contrast. So it's a kind of magic trick. The darker floors make spaces seem bigger. And then, the exterior materials are just 2 tones of cement plaster, integral color. One is a deep gray and a white. On the back, the guest house is concrete and concrete board. Very simple. In our office, we do a lot of residential work of all different scales. And certainly Southern California has a strong history of residential architecture, right? Going back, of course, Schindler and Wright and Neutra. And I think everyone who does residential work in Los Angeles is a part of that lineage, whether one likes it or not, in some kind of way. With us, certain commonalities with that. I mean, there's clearly an inside-outside.
Well, I think the main thing is that our house is like being outside. When you're in our house, in most of the daily use spaces, you really feel like you're in the garden. I also designed the garden, and I do landscape architecture in addition to architecture. I really think the backyard feels like a courtyard. It's contained on one side by the house, on another side by the guest house, which is at the top of the site, and on a third side by the bridge. And the bridge connects this terrace that we're on to our roof deck. And the cool thing about the bridge is that it's also a ramp. So the bridge goes down exactly 42 inches. And that's exactly the height of the guardrail on the roof deck. So basically what that means is the guardrail on the roof deck is the exact same height as this ground plane here. And so that actually makes that roof deck feel farther away than it really is. It also allows us to see over it even more than we would if it's the same height as this terrace.
We're on a site here that's, first of all, it's a small house. This is 1,800 square feet with a 400 square foot guest house in the back. It's a small lot, 5,000 square feet, 50 feet wide, 130 feet deep. And it's an upslope. So it's one of those houses where you enter from the garage, which is below us, and walk up through the sequence. From the front, it's actually pretty normative. It's mostly the existing 1955 house, which had a kind of maybe modernist bent to it. It has kind of the pitched, low-slung roof. And then we completely blew out the whole back of it. So in essence, we kept the front maybe 15 feet of the house, and then redid everything in the back, adding only really 500 square feet. So from that front, you kind of slide up through the house through a series of kind of smaller spaces. Within that 1,800 and 400 square foot area are these expanses of garden and outdoor spaces on the roof, the little stair up, which are filled with kind of seating areas and different places to hang out. So it's a kind of house that's, well, certainly inside, outside is part of it. It's also about a smaller sequence of spaces that you slide through and kind of discover. It's really always different depending on what kind of space you're in, and that's fantastic for living in it. It's a great house for parties because of that, because you can have small intimate groups on all multiple levels, and at night it's really wonderful in the evening.
One of my favorite spaces is the shower. When you take a shower, you feel like you're in the middle of the backyard. You can see the whole backyard, but you feel like you're totally private. One of my other favorite spaces is the kitchen. I love to cook, and so the kitchen is really large and also has direct access to the backyard. There's two splurges on the house. One splurge is the stone floors, which work with the radiant heat, and the other splurge is the bridge. So basically the only thing in the house that I don't need is the bridge, but it's my favorite part of the whole house because it creates a courtyard space in the backyard and also provides amazing connection from the terrace to the roof deck.
One of the challenges during construction was the bridge, which is behind me. It's a steel structure, it's 32 feet long, and it had to be craned in over the house. It was a really fun moment, and it was very delicately moved over the house. Actually, it took two cranes. The first crane couldn't reach, so they had to send it back. Then they brought back the second crane. And the interesting thing about that is when you have two separate structures in an earthquake, they'll move at different rates. It's attached actually to the back deck, but it's a slip joint at the house, so the two things can move independently. So they brought it in. I was worried that it wasn't going to fit. It fit exactly right. It was fantastic. Margaret and I in our practice has been 18, almost 19 years now. And one of the things that we both hold dear is, well, let's say the need to build, the need to test ideas in the built environment. And over those 19 years, I don't think there's been one time when we weren't building something. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're larger. Our own house was a chance to try some things out that we have been doing on a series of other residential projects at a small scale. The kind of practitioner, educator is a model we're really comfortable with. And with that comes things like this, which are maybe pieces of projects that are involved in some of the larger aspects of our work. And it becomes a kind of test bed.
Well, one of the great things about building your own house is you can do things at your own house that you might not be able to do for clients. So the bridge is an example of that. The roof deck is an example of that. And one of the most amazing components of the roof deck is the hydraulic skylight, which right now you can see that it's open in the background. But when we're not using the skylight to walk through, the skylight can be lowered, and the whole form of the skylight is very low on the roof, and you see directly over it. And basically, by keeping the house small and by not adding a second story on the house, that enabled the whole yard and the whole space to feel much bigger than it really is. By code, we could have put a lot more square footage on the site, and that's usually what our clients ask us to do. But by choosing to only build the amount we needed, that's how we could make it so this room looks over our house. We actually make the whole site feel bigger.
The average American house is well over 3,000 square feet now, and it really doesn't need to be. So I think as architects, the first step is we don't need that much area, particularly in Southern California where we can use the indoor and outdoor. So you can make a house feel larger than it really is by strategically how you place, openings like this and windows. We don't need to cool this house, so there's no air conditioning. We accept that for a couple weeks in August, it's a little warm and hot, but it's simply using radiant heat, which is on really efficient water heaters. And so we actually use very little energy.
So while we didn't design this house to be a quote-unquote sustainable house, there's a lot of features that one would consider sustainable. The house opens up completely to the outside, and we have no air conditioning, so we ventilate our house through natural ventilation. The radiant heat in the floors essentially means that we have hydronic pipes in the floors, and so during the winter when we need heat, it's a very low cost to heat the house. Also, the garden and the landscape is highly sustainable. We have a lot of low water plants, and we create an ecology with the garden. Near the kitchen of the house, we have a whole courtyard made of round pavers, and between the courtyard is natural thyme. The thyme blooms twice a year. It becomes a bee farm, and then this bee farm provides pollination to all the bees that helps a local ecology of fruited plants. When we first moved into the house, the main thing that we could afford to do was make an amazing garden, and that first garden I now call the lost garden. The new garden has a lot of similar qualities as the first one. since I have a lot of succulents in the garden, and one of the reasons why I have succulents in the garden is because they create a new ecology. So you can probably hear right now we have birds in the backyard, we have hummingbirds, we have dragonflies, and a whole variety of ecologies. It feels like an oasis. Because of their succulents, a lot of the plants that I used, the way that I could save them is you just take them out of the ground and you just leave their root ball open to the air, and you don't water them, and you can store succulents like that for a long time. So I took all the succulents out of the ground and I stored them back here in a staging area. Then I was able to reuse all the succulents when we planted the garden again. But we did bring in some new plants, and sort of living with that first garden for 10 years, we figured out certain plants which thrived better and certain plants that we liked more. So the second garden has some qualities of the first garden, but it's actually a lot different.
Also the landscape using, xeriscaped, that requires really just small drip irrigation, very little water. I think all of these things certainly encompass this house, and it's just best practices.
So the big idea of the house is really to maximize the entertaining space of the house and minimize the bedroom area of the house. So we have 2 bedrooms, which are very compact, and we really have a huge entertaining area. The house was always a split level and was always set halfway into the hill, which is why it was a split level. So the bedroom level always worked out to the backyard, and the living room level initially opened up to a small courtyard that had a retaining wall. And when we first moved in, we took out the retaining wall and we turned it into an amphitheater-like set of stairs. Then when we added to the house, we basically made that little courtyard, we brought that into the house and expanded the living space of the house. There's another terrace that opens directly out to the bedrooms, and so now the connection between the living room to that terrace and the bedroom to that terrace creates a courtyard space that makes you feel like you're outside even when you're in the house.
When we have guests visiting, they have access to the roof, and in a way, in section, you've got the hill like this, our house, and up top the guest house and the roof. So it is a kind of interlocking way of having kind of both things have privacy in a way, but normally day to day it's all open for us.
Sometimes doing a renovation can cost more than doing a ground up house, but for us, actually the existing house that we had pretty good bones, so it was more cost effective to keep some of the existing house and just remake it as a whole. And there was another technical reason why we kept the existing house, because the front yard setbacks on our street changed over the course of the last few years. And originally it was a 10-foot front setback, and all of the houses on our street are 10 feet back from the street. But then they recently changed it to be a 20-foot front yard setback. So in order to keep our living room where it is, we had to do a renovation. If we would have done a ground up house, we would have had to move our whole house back 10 feet. It was more cost effective, and we were able to transform the way we live with some strategic thinking about how to renovate the house.
We designed the guest house first, and we built that before renovating this front part of the house. And when we finished it, we started to design this, and that's when we had the idea of the bridge that would connect the two. We worked really closely with the contractor. The goal was to do the entire thing in 11 months. So we had to move out, and we had to rent another house, and we did it exactly in 11 months. So we were very proud of that, but we had to really work symbiotically with the contractor. I was on site every week doing sketches, hand doing everything just as rapidly as possible. There's always challenges with existing homes because you open them up and they're falling apart and you have to replace everything anyway. The construction of the process went really quickly, which was great. One of my favorite moments is something that's not here yet, which is the aluminum stair in the living room is meant to be retractable. It was designed by Tom Farage, who's an alumni of SCI-Arc and a great fabricator. It's aluminum. It only weighs about 240 pounds, and it's hinged so that we can, on a counterweight, have it disappear. And the hatch on the top, which is the skylight, is also set up so that it's super low and compact. So from the back view of the house, you're looking over, so you don't have like a stair tower on the top. So it was a way to kind of sneak in a little connection that didn't exist before. I like to say the house is like a big chair for the view. So from the top, you see it's really a series of terraces from the rooftop to this space, to the back, to the top. It's purposefully low to the ground. This is an interesting neighborhood in that we overlook the house below, they overlook the house below that, and the houses behind us overlook. So it's a kind of stepped section. So we were cognizant of that, And we could have built actually higher, but we kept it low, so we keep that low profile so that everybody's kind of stepping down the hillside. But from above, it's really just a big platform. You know, it's almost a non-building in a way. It's just a series of terraces that overlook. We're looking now towards LAX a little bit. I say we don't have an ocean view, we have an ocean glimpse, which is over to the right. But at night, it's fantastic. We watch the planes come in from LAX. When we're up on the roof and we're seeing planes come in and planes take off, you really feel you're like a part of Los Angeles.